to the War Report. Now, tonight I am alone because out of my generosity, I gave GSP a night off because he just got home from his trip. But he'll be back next week. Not to worry, but this is my first time on my own, and I'll be attempting something new. I'm going to let the viewers pile in, but as always, I'm not going to leave our after the fact viewers with dead air. So let's actually get into it. We got a couple of viewers now. Sorry, I actually just had a bit of a coughing fit, so I'm a bit out of breath right now. So please excuse that. Just gonna take a drink real quick. Now let's begin with Syria. So the meeting on Friday in Turkey between the French, the Germans, the Russians, the Iranians, and several delegations trying to figure out the fate of Idlib yielded really no results. So that is unfortunate, which means there's probably going to be an offensive on Idlib. However, I do not know when, but it hasn't really begun yet. However, the military is massing outside of the city, and there's been airstrikes on Idlib, which there has been for a while now, but they've been increasing, and the MSM is spewing the propaganda that they always love to spew. They're coming out and saying, oh, Assad has greenlit the use of chemical weapons. However, there's a little bit of kernel of hope in there saying, oh no, but we're concerned that Trump won't respond. We're concerned he won't step up to his duty and punish the evil Assad for using chemical weapons when it makes no sense. So there is about a little bit of hope there. And the Russians have been claiming another false flag is being planned. I think this is very plausible, but at the end of the day, this is a propaganda tactic, of course, since we got to look at it. Everyone is going to spin whatever information is there, or whatever information they perceive to be there, to their benefit. If Russia can countersignal against the U.S. now, they're going to do it. I frankly don't blame them, and I really don't care, especially considering the fact I am a complete advocate for getting out of Syria, so I couldn't care less what the Russians say about Syria, honestly. Now, the Russians have also claimed as part of their information war, as you will, that the U.S. used white phosphorus while bombing Syria. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if this happened. I actually wouldn't be surprised if this was an Israeli strike pinned on the U.S. because Israel does have a thing for white phosphorus if you'll pay attention to anything going on in Gaza. So there's that. And it again seems like just more of a war of words at this point than anything. And really, it's been quite nice because despite, of course, your Nikki Haley's, your Mike Pompeo's, your State Department, the usual suspects, Trump himself has actually been very quiet on the issue for about the past week or so, which I'm happy about, of course. Now, as I said, the U.S. has been quiet. However, they've also been doing a bit of projecting of their own. And last week, it was announced that the U.S. would keep a small amount of troops in Syria, a amount of contractors, which they'll never mention, to ensure that ISIS does not resurge and to also, quote, counter Iranian influence, whatever that means. Now, these troops also did a live fire drill in eastern Syria near the Iraqi border to, quote unquote, send a message. These troops are also mostly in Kurdish-controlled Syria, so I'm actually going to get into that later. Just hold on to that bit of information since it'll be pertinent later as part of my analysis of this. Now, as I've said over the past few weeks, the Idlib offensive is a very, very delicate situation. And Putin himself has actually been reluctant to really give Assad the green light to have a full-on offensive of it because he's been trying to court Erdogan. He's been trying to pull Turkey into the Russian sphere to great success, actually, especially you remember Trump, I think it was almost a month ago at this point, saying that Turkey must release Pastor Brunson or whatever his name is, and he's also putting the sanctions and the tariffs on Turkey. So, again, I'm not too concerned. Turkey isn't much of an ally in the first place. Not really great loss. I'm actually kind of glad that they're drifting away from us. The less involvement, the less allies we have there, the better, the less reason we have to be in that region, which has given us nothing but pain and bankruptcy and suffering. But I think, for the most part, it'll likely just be an air campaign, similar to, you remember, about a year and a half ago, the Aleppo offensive, where the neocons would just cry out saying, oh, we must have stopped Assad from bombing all these targets that make no sense. We have to stop the evil Russians and the Iranians. We have to intervene. However, nothing was done. That was end of Obama's presidency, beginning of Trump. So that was an interesting time because you had Trump still really on the campaign trail saying, oh, we're done with interventions, really before he assumed office. Now, I'm not trying to bash Trump here, but he has given in to them somewhat. Granted, you have to, but that's all aside the point. I feel like I'm rambling here a bit. To get back to it, I think actually the Turks will intervene, and the chat is agreeing with me a bit to really secure their own area, similar to Afrin. I think, if anything, Idlib is going to be a mix between Aleppo and Afrin, where you're going to have the assaults where the neocons cry out, but nothing is done. They're going to try to fake some attacks, but they're probably not going to stick because, for some reason, they only stick in southwestern Syria near a border of a certain greatest ally we have. I'm not saying anything. I'm not saying that there's any underhanded going on there or any suspicious thing. It's all just a coincidence, trust me. But I think Turkey will move in, and I think the Russians will keep the air power, and I think Aleppo is going to turn out to be a big nothing. Now, will there be another false flag? I'm actually a bit conflicted on this question, and I'm going to be honest. I have no idea. But if there is one, it won't be until the offensive actually starts, and it won't be until the rebels are going for a last-ditch effort. They are not as foolish as they often seem to be. They will sit on this card until they really, really need it. And if in that case, we're probably going to see if there's one of these things. It's probably going to be in the next 2 to 3 weeks, if anything. It's not going to be tomorrow. It's not going to be next week. Granted, I could be wrong, but based on the information that has been presented before me, of course, I don't have some security clearance, but based on the information I could find, if it's going to happen, it's going to be in a little bit, and I don't expect much to come of it. I think it'll be pretty much a repeat of the last two. My apologies for stumbling there. But there's a few different circumstances that may hint that we may even not respond if there's a chemical attack. Now, hint number one is back in January of this year, the Trump administration accused Assad of using chemical weapons, I believe it was 6 times in 1 month. However, there was no response beyond economic sanctions, which, again, I really don't care about economic sanctions. It's not getting us into another disastrous war, which I'm not happy about it. I can tolerate it. I'll say that much. But another factor that is brings much more optimism is Rand Paul. Now, Rand Paul has been in Trump's ear since the Helsinki summit with Vladimir Putin. Since he was one of the really politicians that only come out and actually endorse it and say, I'm happy about this move. And so Rand Paul, in short, has gained a lot of influence with Donald Trump. Now, it's been theorized that Trump has been quieter on the Iran issue because of Rand Paul's advice, and he's become something of an unofficial advisor, which is actually kind of funny. You look at it, because Trump has been listening to Rand Paul, more people like John Bolton, Nikki Haley, and his official advisors and people he actually appointed. He's listening to the senator from Kentucky as opposed to these people, which strikes me as kind of funny. I'm happy about it, but we also the current political system is. So glad he's gained his trust on that, and I'm thinking that'll probably prevent us from doing anything too drastic on the issue. Now, I do want to take this moment about the whole Syria issue just to address the black pillars, I guess you could call them. The people looking for a constant reason to be pessimistic. Frankly, it's annoying, it's depressing. I try not to associate with them too much. Now, what they have to realize is just we have nations. This is not the Cuban Missile Crisis, nor is this even the spy plane incident in 1960 where the Soviet Union shot down a U.S. spy plane over their airspace. So we're nowhere near those level of tensions. Now, another thing that may sound kind of blackpilling on the surface, but really when you put it in the perspective, it's not that bad, is U.S. and Russian contractors openly engaged with each other in Syria as recently as February. However, neither government made too much of a stink about it. Neither one of them condemned each other. It was almost like a quiet secret war between the U.S. and Russia, I guess you could say, where they were having mercenaries on both sides just actually having live fire with each other and actually killing each other, but nothing came of it, and we're not in World War III, and we're not living in a post-nuclear hellscape, which I'm very glad for. And despite Russian rhetoric, I don't think they care about these retaliatory strikes after these so-called chemical attacks. We, as the United States, have done much more damage to Bashar al-Assad's forces by just accidentally bombing his forces than any of these strikes hitting empty buildings or airfields ever have. If the regime change were to come, it would have happened already. I think it probably would have happened back in April 2017 if we were actually committed to regime change. And I think Trump, despite the influences around him, still has enough control to say, we're not going to full out war. Sorry, guys. Maybe next time. Maybe in 4 to 8 years when I'm out of here. But I think Trump still has that level of control. And I think his, I guess you could call them neocon handlers, for lack of a better term, allow this because they don't want to risk his popularity, considering his base came from a more non-intervention standpoint. Actually, a lot of the Ron Paulites came from that. Now, just a last word on Syria. I mentioned the troops we had there, and I think we're actually keeping those troops there. Hear me out. I think it's more focused on our relationship with Turkey at this point than anything. The U.S. will most likely begin to openly support Kurdish nationalism. And we're probably going to use that, of course, as a wedge against Turkey. It hinders Iranian operations in both Iraq and Syria. And what a lot of people are ignoring is we've entered fourth-generation warfare. Now, just as a brief, previously, third-generation warfare was the way countries fought each other. It was large, massive, industrialized armies fighting each other on battlefields. World War II would actually be a good example of that. Now, fourth-generation warfare, as it's described, blurs the line between civilian and soldier, politics, and country in general, and pretty much turns everything into a battlefield. It's about using ethnic and religious groups and their tensions between them to fight a war on your behalf. Pretty much what we've been doing. That's basically been our policy in the Middle East. However, of course, Iraq wouldn't count as fourth-generation warfare since we actually did intervene. So there was that. But if there's going to be a regime change in Syria, it's going to be a lot of a quieter war. And, I know the Kurds aren't popular and people will really just use them as they need them, but I'm going out on a limb here. I think the U.S. will be more proactively supporting the Kurds, mainly because of our relationship with Turkey and because it hinders the Iranians, as I said. Now, like I said, if there's going to be a regime change in Syria, it'll be a quiet war between U.S. and Russian mercenaries, allying with various ethnic and religious groups that most of the world won't even know that this conflict is going on, but there's just going to be a slow-burning war there, pretty much what it's been for the past few years or so. That's my take on it. Now, I'm going to shift the subject to Iraq, which has been quite the interesting case. A lot of people actually haven't covered this, but religious tensions have been rising in Iraq, no surprise. The Sunnis have been demonstrating outside the Iranian consulate in the majority Shia city of Basra. Now, this also comes after al-Sadr's, and he was, of course, Shia Mahdi army during the initial U.S. intervention. He's had successes in Iraqi politics, especially in the parliament. Now, Reuters has also claimed that the Iranians were moving missiles into Iraq, but Baghdad has denied these claims. The U.S. State Department also used this to basically condemn the Iranians and tongue lash them. So there's still a bit of saber rattling with Iran. Granted, it's nowhere near as bad as it has been in the past, but it's a bit ridiculous. I just think it just shows a stunning success of the U.S. intervention in Iraq. I mean, you look at it, it's a nice first world democracy now. It was worth all the lives and all the money and all the destabilization of the region we poured into it because it's just such a successful country. You just see the Sunnis and the Shias holding hands. They're definitely not fighting. It definitely doesn't look like a religious civil war has been going on in Iraq ever since 2006. No, none of that has happened. Just ignore that. That's conspiracy theory. That's isolationist propaganda. Just ignore all of that. Now, these are interesting developments, but like I said, it just shows how much of a disaster the U.S. intervention has been, and the destabilization of another, quote, U.S. ally, which lessens U.S. influence in the region, which at the end of the day is a good thing. I want to get out of there as much as the next guy, and the less allies we have there, the better, the less reason we have to be there. So I think actually this whole Iraq story is a victory at the end of the day. However, we still have the troops there, which, that's kind of standard place at this point. But let's move on to actually some pretty good news that I'm not going to try to twist around. And that's on North Korea. Now, slowly but surely, progress marches on. So in North Korea, they had their 70th Independence Day parade. However, they did not display their ballistic missiles in the parade as they've done for the past 2 decades. So that's actually been pretty interesting because North Korea, even as recently as last year, would have the missiles on display and basically all their military hardware, which, we're being honest, half of it probably doesn't work. It just they just like to show it off, but the missiles are out of the picture of the parade, which shows a symbolic victory, at least for Trump's peace negotiations. Because Trump, aside from the denuclearization, which, in all honesty, that's been John Bolton really hammering on that. John Bolton, Mike Pompeo, again, I have my thoughts for them, but I will reserve them now. They have really been hammering on that. Trump has been hammering on the missiles as well. And now the missiles are the picture. Now, you could try to credit this to Trump, or you could try to credit this to the multiple meetings that North and South Korea have held with each other over about the past year or so. And on top of this, another just good news, I mentioned this last week, Trump has suspended the joint military drills with South Korea, much to the chagrin of the Pentagon and Secretary Mattis in particular. Now, North and South Korean officials are actually going to have another meeting, I believe, within the next week or so, and this continues the trend, and things generally look good on North Korea. Trump definitely needs to meet with Kim again. He needs to really stop this hardball stuff. I think the time for that has passed. I think he needs to at least send Pompeo back over. I know he canceled his trip about a month ago. I think it's getting a bit ridiculous at this point, and I think we need to just reach out to North Korea yet again. So in other news, speaking of our good friend John Bolton, he has now threatened the International Criminal Court with sanctions and has refused to cooperate with them over investigations to U.S. war crimes in Afghanistan. Now, this is just probably the most ridiculous headline of the episode, just the fact that you're going to sanction an international body. They claim for investigation into war crimes in Afghanistan, which include both the U.S. and Taliban side, but Bolton also cited the fact that anti-Israel bias played a part in the U.S. challenging the ICC, which, again, it's just ridiculous. It shows where his loyalties really lie. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm frustrated. Now, as a side note, I actually do have confidence that Bolton will be out soon. I believe they brought him on, Trump brought him on, in order to have somewhat of a good cop, bad cop negotiations with North Korea, saying, oh, look, you can speak to me, or I can hand things over to Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, and we can make life a living hell for you. So I think that was the purpose of bringing those two on, at least, and I think both of them are seeing less relevance, more distance towards Trump. Actually, again, another side note, I think about that op-ed that was written about a week ago. I think Bolton probably wrote it, just based on a lot of things that were talked about in there, but they have been having a lesser role within Trump's administration, and as I said, Rand Paul has been having an increased role, and I hope he's actually being groomed for Secretary of State. Maybe this is just wishful thinking, but at the end of the day, I think Rand Paul is going to see a more increased role in the administration. Hopefully Secretary of State, if I had to pick anything for him. Now, I think ultimately the U.S. challenging the ICC is a dumb move, especially for the reasons we cited, especially the Afghanistan thing, considering the fact we should have been out of Afghanistan 13 years ago. I think we've long overstayed our welcome there. I think there was some initial point to that war, but I think whatever initial point was there has all but dissipated. And yes, I think this is a dumb move in general. I think this just makes it look bad on the world stage. I think it makes us look a bit unhinged. But all of that being said, overall, I think the ICC is a worthless organization that really does nothing. And I don't mind too much that the U.S. is challenging them, but I don't think it's a pertinent move, nor do I think it's an excellent move, but I'll tolerate it. And it's just a bit like, oh, that's happening. And interesting thing about Bolton's comments, he said, I can't wait for the organization to die on its own, which I will cede that ground to him. The organization probably will crumble along with these other international organizations. Just the nature of them is unsustainable. Now, I'm sorry, this is probably going to be a bit of a short show. because I'm doing it solo. I hope you guys don't mind, but I still want to just continue on into Venezuela. Now, rumors have been flying that the U.S. has been holding secret meetings with Venezuelan opposition groups. Now, this would not surprise me, however, I have yet to see any evidence of this happening, because it's mainly come from the Venezuelan government. Now, Maduro went as far as saying, the United States is trying to stage a coup against me, and this is an attempt at regime change. Again, that also wouldn't surprise me, especially if these leaks about Trump's comments on Venezuela are true, which, again, I have no way of knowing whether they are or not. But all of this being said, I still oppose this. And I oppose this for many reasons, not just on principle or pragmatic. It's actually both. Now, in general, I am in favor of taking more of a active stance on Latin America. They're our backyard. I think it fits in the Monroe Doctrine. I think we need to secure the countries around us at the very least. I don't think we need to be doing it over in some desert or mountain in Yemen or Afghanistan. But I think countries directly to the south of us are actually of our concern. And I'm not saying that just because I want another war. This is probably the most hawkish area I'm on. But with that being said, I have my thoughts on Maduro. And the main reason I actually oppose getting involved is because we would just make the situation worse. That's actually the basis of a lot of my opposition to intervention in any capacity in pretty much almost every country in the world. Now, what you have to understand about the Venezuelan opposition is they're pretty much ideologically completely in line with the current president Maduro. They still hold the same socialistic views. Most of them still revere Chavez, however you prefer pronouncing it. They still revere him as this great leader who brought Venezuela into some golden age. So fundamentally, they still have a lot of the same problems as Maduro's government. It's just that they have nicer faces and better PR people and look better on the surface. So that's one of the main reasons I oppose assisting the opposition, because we're just going to put them in power if we do this. We're going to put them in power. They're going to implement the same policies that made Venezuela fail before. However, they can legitimately shift blame onto the U.S., at least in the eyes of the international community. They can shift blame on the U.S. saying, oh, look, they put power did to us, despite the fact that again, it would just give us. So, with all of this, it would just be a loss to try to install which I don't even know, so-called. But if you really want my honest opinion on Venezuela, is we should lift the sanctions completely and let nature take its course. Because Venezuela sanctions, I sincerely believe that. We should let it fall. We should let it run its course. We should let them deal with their issue. Eventually collapse there with a smile on her face, with her hand out, and help them rebuild and bring them into major oil per hemisphere. But the U.S. production, it doesn't hurt to have oil, especially allies with these. So we should completely disengage from the situation. Let things play out. Would ultimately be the best fate. Now is not going to happen, but apparently. I apologize for interruption. Technology always the best, but we can't go through with that hiccup. So I usually have someone on air to tell me, hey, but let's continue. Venezuela, we just going to meddle and sanction there, and that's and the new out of all of this will not be friendly towards our interest. It's just full. So I wanted to move on to Brazil now in the region of Latin America. Now in Brazil, nation President Jair Bolsonaro pronounces his first name. He was stabbed actually going through a crowd. Now he's been known to serve. He's been known to supporters, hug them, and like they serve him. They will lift him out. Interesting. Just imagine that from Americans' perspective. We're county commissioner here. So it's been an interesting sight to see. However, the mass amount of security has by this most recent assassination attempt on Bolsonaro, now far left group, and no surprise, I think it was like some international socialist organization. I can't remember the exact name of the organization, but Bolsonaro has seen a boost in support from this, and seeing as his opponent is currently sitting in a prison cell for corruption charges, he's most likely going to win this election, despite being outpolled by that man in a prison cell. Keep that in mind. That is how much of a chaotic state the Brazilians are in right now. The fact where they think a man in prison is most qualified to lead their country. However, again, I don't personally care if they elect him. I only care insofar as it affects the U.S., which honestly, it won't be that much, if anything. Now, I've seen some theories fly, and I personally discount them, that this assassination attempt came from a foreign state. Now, we have to consider this. It doesn't seem sophisticated enough. You figure they would have tried to use a car bomb or shoot him or something along those lines. But no, I think this was just somebody who was within rabid opposition to him in a country with high tensions, and I think everything's just playing out that way. However, expect tensions to rise in Brazil because, as I said, he's the only viable candidate, and he's probably going to win this election. When he does, it's going to make the reaction to Brexit, it's going to make the reaction to Trump's election, going to make the reaction to any of these elections in Western Europe or North America look like mere child's play. So definitely keep your eye on Brazil. I'm not sure when they're actually holding the election. I believe it's in October. But things there are probably going to get a bit messy, so that's definitely something to consider. And I think it'll be interesting to watch, and I hope things don't get too violent. I hope we don't see a civil war, and I'm being a bit dramatic here, but I hope we don't see a civil war direct there to myself, especially with the immigration situation now. That would only exaggerate it, which would not be good. However, I know I'm cutting it a bit short tonight, but I wanted to move on to our last section, just discuss some news about the EU, the Swedish elections, the recent spat with Hungary, and just a bit of funny news about Macron. So, the Eurosceptic Swedish Democrat Party received about 18% of the votes in the election on Sunday. Now, this is actually up from last election cycle, about 5%. The incumbent Social Democratic Party, which has been in power for, I think, I'm honestly not sure, but for several election cycles now, has also remained in power through this election cycle. Now, this is not a total loss for the Swedish Democrats. The center-left coalition, which includes the Social Democrats, the ones that just won this most recent election, lost 15 seats. And the center-right coalition, which is pretty much just, oh, we're going to lower your taxes 5%, but continue all the policies of the incumbent government, lost 14 seats, while the Swedish Democrats managed to gain 13 seats. And the alternative for Sweden, the further right party, further right than even the Swedish Democrats, the ones who you actually could consider at least on the right wing at all, made no gains in parliament. They didn't enter parliament at all. So that's actually a bit disappointing. But again, these things are a gradual process. People think if they don't sweep the parliament with a majority,
that one election cycle that all is lost now. I could see why there may be some pessimistic takes, especially about Sweden, but people have to realize this is a game of patience. It's, again, a waiting game. There's a reason I chose this title. I'm very creative now that I'm done praising myself. Let's get back into the news. But on top of this, there's been murmurs of election fraud. This wouldn't surprise me at all. However, I have yet to see any evidence. But an interesting thing about their election is they allegedly do not have closed ballots. They have open ballots where if you want to vote for a certain party, you have to openly take that party's ballot into the ballot box, where, of course, it's going to create social pressure. Imagine if we did that in the United States. Hillary Clinton would have won by a landslide just because of the stigma, because, evil Trump. We would be in a much different situation in this country if we did not have secret ballots. That's just insane to think about to me. And I think it's funny because Sweden likes to pride itself as this humanitarian superpower, this bastion of democracy and progressivism, but they can't even implement secret ballots, something most countries had in the 19th century. Keep that in mind. I just think it's a bit ridiculous. I've gained a bit more hope for Sweden. However, again, time will tell. It's a waiting game. But just a bit of funny news now is that a new poll has shown French President Macron with a 71% disapproval rating. Now, Macron, we don't know what he believes in because I don't think he knows what he believes in. He has been deemed a wild card on the war report by both me and other co-hosts I've had on, but he changes his position drastically from day to day. One day he's saying we need to combat the Russians, we need to stand up to them. Then the next day he's saying the EU should reach out to Russia because the United States has become unreliable. One day he's saying we need to intervene in Syria. The next day he's saying intervening in Syria would be a mistake. One day he's saying we need to control migration. The next day he's saying migration is good for France. The man has no direction. No wonder he has a 71% disapproval rating. He's angered both his initial supporters, the left wing in the country and the right wing in the country, because he'll do something that'll get their hopes up and then immediately tear it down. And I have no idea how this man got elected, but he is, if anything, apex neoliberal. And it's just amazing to see how he is faltering in his presidency, because a falter in his presidency ultimately shows a faltering in neoliberalism and the current world order. Now, I mean, just to continue on Macron, this man, again, he is, dare I say, insane. I know that's probably not a fitting word here, but he says he wants to be the next emperor of France. He goes back on all this stuff, and then he'll say something completely different. But I think I've gotten my rant about Macron out of the way, and I do agree with the chat. France does need to surrender and just accept the appointed government, and they just need to make themselves a vassal of the. They might as well just incorporate this themselves into Germany. The whole liberation of France, it was all for nothing because they basically submitted to the Germans anyway. So, yeah, just with my ramblings about Macron out of the way, I need to get into probably one of the bigger news items tonight, which is why I saved it for last. So, the EU Parliament has voted to censure Hungary for quote-unquote not following Western values. Now, apparently Western values means, secularism, gay rights, no culture, just libertine values, if I had to put it anyway. And apparently Hungary, for actually standing up for its own culture and country, is violating that, and that is, bad somehow. So the EU Parliament needs to censure them and move to place sanctions on them. Now, I do find this ironic from the people who claim to champion democracy so much, especially when it comes to foreign theaters. We need to spread democracy to the Middle East. We need to spread democracy to Africa. We need to respect democratic votes. We need another Brexit referendum for the sake of democracy. Now you have a leader in a country with over 70% support, almost a mirror image of how Macron's support looks, saying, no, you're anti-democratic. You can't do that because you're violating our interests. Now, needless to say, the populist bloc was furious. Now, by populist bloc, I mean countries like Poland, Italy, the usual suspects, the ones that have really been revolting against the European Union. And the Polish president actually came out as far as to say the EU needs to stop meddling in Hungarian affairs and went as far as to call them a fake union. So that was definitely interesting to see. But it's interesting because also in the European Parliament, the bloc of conservative leaders, which includes countries like Merkel, because Merkel is technically part of the right wing party in Germany, they have condemned Hungary and pretty much expelled them from their alliance in the EU Parliament. So the Hungarians have pretty much been left on their own, aside from a few countries. Now, this also plays into it because they have been warmer with the Russians, especially since 2015. So now they're going to complain that Orban is a Russian puppet because they shunned him and pretty much exiled him, and they're going to complain because he runs to the Russians. Or conversely, he's also going to reach out to the United States and say, oh, you're not being a good EU member, you're talking to members outside of the Union. And it's just ridiculous how this man, who's really has very little power as it is politically and geopolitically, just considering the size and position of Hungary in the world, he's become a symbolic face of a revolutionary movement, of the resurgence of nationalism within the Western world. I have a great amount of respect for Viktor Orban, if you could not tell. So it's frustrating because you have this man who is fundamentally standing up for his country's interests, pretty much did nothing wrong, is beloved by his people, but he cannot stand because he threatens our current world order. And I wish him the best. I mean, it's even to the point where the U.S. State Department targeted him last election because he didn't fit into some interests of the U.S., probably something about the Russians and the new Cold War. But if I were Donald Trump, if I could make a recommendation to him, and the 1 in a billion chance he watches the show, reach out to the Hungarians, have an official meeting with Orban, show that the United States stands with Hungary, show that the Hungarians have both courted the United States and the Russians, and fundamentally the EU means nothing to them, and they do not need them. That would be my advice if I could give any, and that would be what I would try to do. But it's both frustrating and encouraging because if they thought he wasn't a threat, they wouldn't be doing this. Kind of how I feel about the whole situation in neocons right now. If they were really so concerned, if they really thought they were going to get their war in X, Y, or Z country, they wouldn't be so concerned with pushing it. Again, they're projecting because they're scared. And that is fundamentally what the European Union is doing with the Hungarians. They are scared of Orban. They are scared of what he can do. And they are scared of this populist wave spreading even more westward because from elections last year, the ADF is now the opposition party to Merkel's coalition. And that puts her in dire straits. And she's already having internal problems as it is. It was already theorized that she would be forced out of office or forced to retire a few months. Very good things on the horizon. At least that's what I see. And that's why I think they're going so hard against it, because they realize this is their window. This is their window to shut it all down. If they're going to do anything, if they're going to maintain their power, it's going to be now. Now, I think they've waited too long to shut this down. I think they've doomed themselves. I'm happy about this. And I think populism will keep on spreading westward. And honestly, just to finish this off, the UK, in terms of the EU, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but it's nice to see the EU crumble, and I would theorize that the EU will probably crumble before the British can even negotiate an exit deal. And yes, just the European Union fall apart, but it's also frustrating to see the actions they take like this with Hungary. Now, I didn't even get into Article 13. I'll probably talk about that tomorrow in a standalone video if you guys want to tune into that. But this has been the War Report. It's been quite an interesting episode. I'm surprised I went on this long alone. I figured this would have been a 20-minute episode. Thank you guys for sticking it out despite the technical difficulties. Not only this week, but next week. I'll try to figure out some new program I can use. I don't know why I always have this robotic problem and this breaking up and just these spats of silence, but it's been a fun show. It's been an interesting show. You could arguably say uneventful considering the fact that a lot of things in Syria just people keep on saying they're going to happen, but they haven't happened yet. So I'm probably going to be talking about this for about the next month or so until we decide to lob a few more missiles and get this over with, which honestly, I wish they would just do it tomorrow so we could just shut up about this and move on about our lives and just leave Syria alone. Because after they take Idlib, it's going to be the end. But I've gone on a bit of tangents here at the end. So this has been the War Report. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and goodbye.